The applause was deafening in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel in New York City. Beneath the dazzling crystal chandeliers, everything shimmered like a dream. I stood next to my husband, Sterling Vance, co-founder of the software company Nexus Solutions, accepting the flood of congratulations with a smile. But before I continue, if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please hit the subscribe button and leave a comment letting us know which city you're watching from in the US. This helps us see how far our story can spread. Today marked the 5th anniversary of the company's founding and the day we officially announced that Nexus Solutions had finally reached a valuation of $1 billion. It was the fruit of the blood, sweat, tears, and youth that our marriage had invested to achieve this milestone. I wore a jade green silk dress, my hair swept up in an elegant chignon, and subtle yet striking makeup. A fullness, difficult to express in words, swelled in my chest. I recalled the day I decided to abandon a promising career in Boston and return home. All my friends told me I was crazy, but I just smiled. Here was Sterling, whom I had loved since our college days, and with whom I believed I would spend the rest of my life. Together, we wrote the first line of code, stayed up all night to finish projects, and shared the little money we had, supporting each other. Nexus Solutions was our spiritual child, the testament to our love and sacrifice. Sterling, in his impeccable custom-tailored suit, looked incredible. He ascended the stage. His voice, warm and self-assured, resonated throughout the ballroom. He spoke of our journey, the countless difficulties and challenges. He thanked the partners and employees who had accompanied us. I watched him from below in silence, feeling immense pride. If he was the technical brain, I was the one who managed external relations and devised the development strategy. We were like two perfectly complementary puzzle pieces, building the solid castle that was Nexus Solutions. At that moment, Sterling's voice cracked, tinged with a strange emotion. Looking at a distant point, he said, "And today, I want to give the most special thanks to one person, my life partner, who has always been an inexhaustible source of inspiration for me, and the driving force that allowed me to overcome every storm. That person, silently by my side, gave me the power to turn the most outlandish ideas into reality." The room held its breath. Without realizing it, I managed a happy smile. I thought he was speaking about me. Hadn't I been that person throughout all these years? I prepared myself to go up to the stage and share that moment of glory with him, but Sterling was not looking at me. His gaze was fixed on a corner of the stage. "Sierra, over here, please." It was a tender voice I had never heard him use before. A young woman appeared from behind the stage. It was Sierra Rhodes, a new employee who had joined the marketing team just over a year ago. She wore a flowing white maternity dress, loose, but unable to hide her visibly swollen belly. There was shyness on her face, but in her eyes shone an unconcealed pride. As she approached Sterling, my husband reached out to help her with astounding naturalness, a tender and intimate gesture. He handed her a bouquet of red roses, my favorite flowers. Time seemed to stand still. The soft music playing in the background suddenly became discordant, and a murmur began to spread. At first it was whispering, but soon it grew into an uncontrollable buzz, like a swarm of wasps. Hundreds of glances fixed on me, looks of curiosity, pity, and above all, compassion. Those gazes hurt more than 1,000 insults. I felt my cheeks burn, my throat dry, and the smile freeze on my lips. There I was, the center of all attention, transformed not into the protagonist of my glorious celebration, but into the most miserable spectacle. Sterling didn't need to say anything more. His gesture, Sierra's belly, everything, was a manifest declaration. Before everyone, he had proclaimed their relationship, his betrayal, and my public humiliation. The exact moment our spiritual child was spreading its wings to fly, the family I had built with all my heart shattered before my eyes. The first feeling that invaded me was not pain, but an emptiness that chilled my body. All the sounds around me faded, and I only clearly saw the image of Sterling and Sierra together under the stage lights. They made a beautiful couple, the successful entrepreneur and the beautiful young woman carrying his child. And I, the wife who had spent the most difficult years with him, had, in an instant, become an old, annoying obstacle, a shadow. The murmurs grew louder. Poor Alexandra, how awful. Who would have thought? So that's what it was. Isolated phrases reached my ears, stabbing my pride like daggers. At the head table, Sterling's mother, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, looked at me with a mixture of satisfaction and disdain. She had never liked me. She always complained that I was too strong and dominated her son. At that moment, she must have been immensely satisfied. I took a deep breath and straightened my back. I couldn't break down, at least not here, not now. I was Alexandra Hayes, the daughter of the great Isabella Hayes, a woman who never learned to bow her head to any adversity. I tightly gripped the clutch bag I was carrying. The physical pain of my nails digging into my palm helped me regain my composure. I stared intensely at the stage toward Sterling, who was trying to avoid my gaze, and then I did something no one expected. I walked slowly toward the stage. My steps were firm, without a hint of hesitation. A strange silence descended upon the ballroom as the silk of my dress brushed the floor. Everyone held their breath, watching what I would do. Sterling and Sierra were visibly disconcerted. My mother-in-law frowned with a cautious expression. I climbed onto the platform and positioned myself right next to Sterling. Then I took the microphone from the stunned presenter's hand, turned toward the guests, and managed a serene smile, a smile I never would have imagined I could produce at such a moment. "Good evening, distinguished guests." My voice sounded clear and calm. "I am Alexandra Hayes, wife of President Sterling Vance, co-founder and majority shareholder of Nexus Solutions." I paused, slowly surveying the room. I clearly saw the astonishment in their eyes. "I would like to express my sincerest gratitude to all our partners and esteemed guests who join us today to celebrate our success. The triumph of Nexus Solutions has been possible thanks to the trust and support of all of you." I turned to Sterling, who was pale and rigid. "I also want to thank my husband for his moving speech. He has always been a talented and passionate man." Then, my gaze shifted to the investors, especially those from Phoenix Capital Group, led by my mother, Isabella Hayes. My voice became firm. "However, in light of recent events, as the majority shareholder and head of the company's development strategy, I believe the time has come to seriously reevaluate the management ethics of our executive leadership." A heavy silence crushed the room. Then I continued, emphasizing every word. "Therefore, I will officially request my mother, the CEO of Phoenix Capital Group, Mrs. Isabella Hayes, to provisionally suspend all additional investment plans in Nexus Solutions. We need time to conduct a complete reevaluation, because if a company desires sustainable growth, a moral foundation must be the paramount value considered." Finishing, I set the microphone down in silence. I gave one last bow to the guests and descended the stage with my head held high. I felt Sterling's stunned gaze, my mother-in-law's face blue with fury, and Sierra's lost expression, who didn't understand anything. Their glorious celebration had been shattered. I didn't scream or make a scene. I simply used my position to return the humiliation they had inflicted. That was the way a woman who doesn't allow anyone to trample on her dignity fights back. I left the hotel without looking back. I didn't want to see the chaos I was leaving behind. I only wanted to escape that suffocating space, the curious glances, and the whispers. I drove myself. My hands, gripping the steering wheel, were white with tension. The tears I had held back all night finally welled up, tracing paths down my cheeks. But they were not tears of weakness. They were tears of injustice and pain. I did not go to the house I had shared with Sterling. That place had become a strange space. I drove directly to my mother's home, the only place in the world where, no matter how broken or defeated I was, I would always be welcome. My mother's mansion stood in a quiet garden, away from the city noise. As soon as he saw my car, the butler rushed to open the door. My mother, CEO Isabella Hayes, seemed to be waiting for me. She was at the door. Despite her petite figure, she radiated imposing dignity. Without asking anything, she simply embraced me. "You are home now. That is what matters, my daughter," she said in a warm voice, gently patting my back. One single hug. A simple phrase from my mother, and all my defenses collapsed. I cried like a child, releasing all the pain and bitterness I had repressed. My mother let me cry for as long as I needed, gently stroking my hair. She knew I needed that moment. When I finally calmed down, she led me to the living room and served me a cup of hot chamomile tea. "You handled it well," my mother said with a look that blended affection and pride. "They told me everything. The way you conducted yourself on stage was admirable. You didn't let them humiliate you, but Mom, it hurts so much. I don't understand why he did this to me. 10 years of relationship, 5 years building a company together. All that is worth less than a woman he's known for barely a year." My mother sighed and took my hand. "Daughter, when a man's heart changes, he becomes this cruel. It's not your fault. You did everything you could as a wife. You simply put your trust in the wrong place. But don't worry, Mom is here. Even if the sky falls, together we will get through this." My mother's resolve was like a balm that slowly calmed my agitated heart. We sat in silence, but I felt a deep connection between us. My mother was not just a mother, she was my friend, my mentor, and the most solid pillar of my life. Just then, the doorbell rang. It was Daniel, my loyal assistant. He had been with me since the company's early days, and was the person I trusted most. His face was etched with worry. "Miss Hayes, you weren't answering your phone, so I came here," he said urgently. "I apologize for the intrusion, but there is something important I need to inform you of immediately." "What is it?" I asked, invaded by a bad feeling. Daniel opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. "Ma'am, lately there have been many strange movements in the company's cash flow. Several large payments have been made to a company called Apex Management LLC. I investigated, and it turns out this company was founded only a few months ago, and its director is none other than Mr. Vance's mother's cousin." My mother and I looked at each other in horror. Daniel continued in a worried voice. "It seems they are creating phantom contracts to divert funds from Nexus Solutions. The amounts are not small, ma'am. And I also discovered that Mr. Vance met several times with his personal lawyer last month." Every word from Daniel was like a hammer blow to my head. This betrayal was much crueler than I had imagined. Sterling was not only being unfaithful, he and his mother were conspiring to seize the entire company and leave me empty, handed on the street. That night's celebration was not just a spectacle to present his mistress. It was the starting signal for a meticulously planned scheme. When Daniel finished speaking, a profound silence settled in the room, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. My mother seemed shocked for a moment, but soon regained the composure of an experienced businesswoman. She took the papers from Daniel's hand, put on her reading glasses, and began to examine them page by page. "Sterling and that woman," my mother said in an icy voice, grinding her teeth. "They have crossed a line they shouldn't have." I sat there, feeling as if I were falling into a bottomless abyss. Before the wound of emotional betrayal could even begin to heal, it was overlaid by the pain of having been cheated out of the business to which I had dedicated all my passion. I thought Sterling had simply changed his heart, that he was temporarily blinded by novelty, but no, this was a calculated conspiracy. They wanted to take everything from me, not just my husband and my home, but also my effort, my intelligence, and my honor. Daniel continued reporting on what he had secretly investigated. The company Apex Management LLC was a shell company with no real commercial activity. The consulting contracts Nexus Solutions had signed with it were all rigged, and the clauses were deliberately ambiguous. In the last 3 months, the transferred amount already amounted to tens of millions of dollars. "And that's not all, ma'am." Daniel hesitated before taking another paper from his briefcase. "This is a draft of the divorce agreement I accidentally saw on Mr. Blank and that communist ////. Vance's lawyer's office computer when I went to pick up some documents. I took a picture of it. With trembling hands, I took the paper. It was a unilateral divorce agreement. In it, Sterling blamed me for everything. It claimed I had focused only on business, neglecting the home and failing to fulfill my duties as a wife. But the cruelest part was related to the division of assets. All shares of Nexus Solutions would belong to him, arguing that he was the principal founder and contributor of the key technology. and I would have to assume all the company's debts, including the phantom debts they had created through their consulting firm. If I signed that document, I would not only be ruined but end up with massive debt. I let out a dry, bitter laugh. So, years of marriage were finally valued at a piece of paper full of betrayal and malice. In the eyes of Sterling and his mother, I had been nothing more than a tool, a stepping stone to reach the pinnacle of glory. And once the goal was achieved, they were ready to discard me without the slightest hesitation. They are even trying to erase any trace of your contribution to the company's technological base, Daniel added, his voice indignant. They have hired another team to rewrite some important modules so they can prove that the idea belonged solely to Mr. Vance from the beginning. Hearing that, I could no longer cry. The pain transformed into a silent flame of anger burning in my chest. That technological base was the work of my life. The idea of a flexible and intelligent business management system was mine. It was born from my experience working in Boston. Sterling was only the one who technically implemented it, and now he intended to steal all the credit. My mother struck the stack of documents on the table. "Enough," she said firmly. "We cannot stand idly by while they do this to us. Alexandra, you have to get up and fight, not to cling to a worthless man, but to defend your honor and what belongs to you. I will be by your side." My mother's determined gaze instilled immense strength in me. Yes, I could not collapse. I had to fight for myself, for the years of youth I had sacrificed, and to make those traitors pay for their actions. This battle would not be easy, but I knew I wasn't alone. I had my mother, Daniel, and the truth was on my side. The next morning, we didn't waste a minute. My mother called an old family friend, the lawyer Eleanor Jensen. She was not one of those media-friendly lawyers who appear in the press, but in the legal world, she was respected for her integrity and vast experience in complex economic litigation. Her office, far from the ostentation of large firms, was on a quiet, discreet street on the Upper East Side. Eleanor Jensen was a woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in an impeccable bun and an intelligent gaze behind her glasses. She received us with chamomile tea. While I explained everything from the theater of the celebration to the evidence Daniel had gathered, she listened in silence, nodding occasionally. When I finished, she finally spoke in a soft but powerful voice. "Alexandra, I am very sorry for what you have had to endure, but amidst the bad news, there is good news. Their haste and audacity at the party were a fatal mistake. Thanks to that, we have gained time to prepare." She took the photo of the divorce agreement Daniel had obtained and read every clause carefully. "A greedy and foolish agreement," she declared. "They underestimated you and your mother. They thought that with the psychological pressure of the mistress and the pregnancy, you would collapse and sign anything. But they were wrong. Eleanor, I trust this case entirely to you. I cannot allow them to do this to my daughter," my mother said. The lawyer nodded. "Don't worry, Isabella. This is not a simple divorce case. It is an asset dispute with indications of fraud and embezzlement. We will not be dragged into the emotional battle of adultery. We will only use that matter as evidence of the irreparable breakdown of the marriage and Sterling's dishonesty. Our focus will be elsewhere." She looked at me intently with her sharp eyes. "Alexandra, from now on, we must outline a clear legal strategy. First, we will focus on demonstrating that your contribution to the founding and development of Nexus Solutions was not just financial, but, more importantly, intellectual property, the core idea and technology." She continued explaining. "We must gather all the evidence, no matter how small it may seem. Emails exchanging the first ideas, sketches, notes in notebooks, and testimonies from former colleagues who witnessed your work from the beginning. All of that will be our weapons. Second," she held up 2 fingers, "we will attack their embezzlement of funds. The fact that Daniel found that shell company is a major advantage. Now we have to dig deeper, track the money flow. This will prove that Sterling and his mother acted opaquely and deliberately harmed the other shareholders, including you." Listening to Attorney Jensen's clear and strategic analysis, my confused mind began to clear. I no longer felt lost or alone. I knew I had found the right person to trust. "Agreed, attorney." My voice sounded much firmer. "I will do as you say. I will look for all my old files." "Good." The lawyer smiled kindly. Remember that the law is on the side of justice. This fight may be long and exhausting, but if we are persistent and gather sufficient evidence, justice will prevail. Turn your pain into strength, Alexandra. The meeting with Eleanor Jensen gave me new energy. I was no longer the tragic heroine of my own story. I was going to be a warrior fighting to recover what was rightfully mine. The first step was to face the past and return to that place that was once my home to find the necessary pieces for the war ahead. 2 days after meeting with Attorney Jensen, I decided to return to the house I had called our home with Sterling. My heart was heavy, filled with mixed emotions. This place held the memories of 10 years of love and married life. Every corner, every piece of furniture I had chosen and placed myself. I thought I would live here all my life, that I would grow old with Sterling in our small garden. But now, every step I took in this house was painful and bitter, like walking on broken glass. I deliberately chose a time midday when I knew Sterling would be at the office. I didn't want to run into him, I just wanted to quietly collect my things and leave. I went directly to the office we shared, where I kept the most important documents. The room was still tidy, but the air was strangely cold. The photo of our wedding on the desk suddenly felt like a cruel mockery. I started searching. I rummaged through old files, opened dusty boxes atop the cabinets, and finally found it. An old brown leather-bound notebook stored in a wooden box. It was the notebook I used when I was in Boston, where I had jotted down spontaneous ideas, the first sketches of an innovative enterprise management software. The pages were yellowed, and my handwriting had faded in some places, but the diagrams of the system architecture, the notes on the key algorithms, remained clear. This was the soul of Nexus Solutions, the undeniable proof of my contribution. With the notebook in my hands, I felt some of the strength I had lost return. I carefully put the notebook and several USB drives with related material into my bag. Just as I was about to leave, the door burst open. Sterling was there, paralyzed when he saw me. He probably didn't expect my return. "What are you doing here?" he asked in a slightly suspicious voice. "I came to pick up my things," I replied calmly, trying not to show any emotion. Sterling looked at the bag I was carrying, and a shadow of unease crossed his eyes. He entered the room and closed the door forcefully. "Alexandra, we need to talk. Please don't complicate things further. What happened at the party was a mistake, but you shouldn't have acted that way either. Do you know the damage you've done to the company?" I let out a laugh, a cold laugh. "I damaged the company? And were you thinking about the company when you planned with your mother to divert its funds? Were you thinking about our years together, my effort, when you prepared a divorce agreement to leave me ruined and burdened with debt?" Sterling's face changed. He hadn't imagined I knew all that. "What nonsense are you talking about? Who told you that?" "It doesn't matter who told me. The important thing is that it is true. Sterling, stop pretending. I'm tired too." I looked him directly in the eyes. Those eyes I once loved so much, now I only saw lies and calculation in them. I loved you and trusted you unconditionally. I left everything to come back here and build a business with you. And how have you repaid me? With betrayal and a cruel conspiracy. Sterling, disconcerted, stepped closer and tried to take my hand. "Alexandra, listen to me. It's not what you think. Sierra was a mistake. I still love you. We can start over. Withdraw the request you made to the investment group. Let's not throw away all our effort." I slapped his hand away and took a step back. His words now only disgusted me. "Start over? Sterling, do you take me for a fool? Is your love that cheap? And what about the child that woman is carrying? What are you going to do with him? Or is everything just a mistake you can easily discard when things go against you?" "I haven't come here today to listen to your excuses or to beg you," I said firmly. "I've come to take back what is mine, and to let you know that I will never sign any unjust divorce agreement. I will fight until the end to defend my honor and my work at Nexus Solutions. Since you and your mother started this, be prepared to face the consequences." After saying this, I didn't give him a chance to respond. I turned, opened the door, and walked out. I heard Sterling shouting my name behind me, but I didn't stop. This confrontation helped me completely cut off the last shred of feeling I had left. There was no more love, no more hope. There was only one path ahead, the path to claim justice. Leaving that house, I felt much lighter. The confrontation with Sterling had been painful but necessary. It helped me completely break with the past and focus on the future. There was no more time for sadness. The evidence I had found was a good start, but as Attorney Jensen had said, the war would be long and arduous. In the following days, Daniel and I worked tirelessly. We systematically organized the information and looked for more witnesses who could corroborate my role in the early days of Nexus Solutions. However, I soon realized that focusing only on recovering what I had lost at Nexus Solutions was a passive fight. Sterling and his mother still controlled the management. They could sabotage me in 1,000 ways. I needed something of my own, a solid base on which I could stand firm, regardless of the outcome of the litigation. The idea of founding a new company began to germinate in my mind, not for revenge or to directly compete with Nexus Solutions, but to prove my own worth. I wanted to show everyone that without Sterling, without Nexus Solutions, Alexandra Hayes could still create an excellent, even superior technological product. I was confident I could rebuild a much better and more modern version of the technological base I had created for Nexus Solutions. I told my mother the idea. After thinking for a moment, she gave me her unconditional support. "That's the way, my daughter. That's the way someone with guts acts. Instead of fighting to recover an old house, build your own new castle. You just worry about the work. I'll take care of the capital." My mother's support was my greatest strength, but I knew that ideas and capital were not enough. I needed companions, technical talent. Then I thought of Andrew. Andrew had been a college friend of Sterling and mine. The three of us used to hang out together. Andrew was kind, studious, and very intelligent, but unlike the outgoing and sociable Sterling, he was quite reserved. I knew he liked me, but he never expressed it in words. He simply cared for me in silence. After graduation, Sterling and I started dating, and Andrew went to study abroad and worked outside the country. A few years ago, I heard he had returned and had become a well-known venture capitalist in the technology sector. I hesitated for a moment but decided to call Andrew. It was a bit awkward contacting him after so long, but his warm, familiar voice on the other end of the phone dispelled all my worries. "Alexandra, long time no talk. How are you?" "Fine, I'm fine." "Andrew, am I bothering you? Bothering me?" "No way. I'm glad you called. But is something wrong? Your voice doesn't sound quite right." Andrew's sensitivity moved me. I mustered my courage and briefly explained my situation and my plans to found a new company. I didn't exaggerate the pain or complain. I laid everything out calmly, as if it were a business plan. Andrew listened in silence until the end. I was prepared for comfort, or in the worst case, pity. But what he said surprised me. "I've been waiting for this day, Alexandra, the day you stepped out of Nexus Solutions' shadow and shone on your own." His voice was full of sincerity. "Your talent is much greater than what you were doing there." "I mean it, Alexandra," Andrew continued. "I've always followed Nexus Solutions' trajectory. I knew its foundation started with your idea. Sterling is an excellent programmer, but the one with the strategic vision is you. The decision to go independent will be the best decision of your life. Tell me what you need. I will support you not only as a friend but also as an investor. I trust you, Alexandra." Andrew's words were like a rush of fresh water, watering my parched soul. For the first time since the incident, a man valued me for my talent and true worth, not through the prism of a betrayed wife. The call with Andrew further strengthened my determination. I knew I had found my first ally in the arduous new journey that lay ahead. After the call with Andrew, everything moved quickly. Andrew was not a man of mere words. He immediately organized a meeting and introduced me to a team of brilliant, recently graduated young engineers from a prestigious technical university like MIT. They were young, full of passion, intelligence, and a burning desire to participate in a project with a great vision. When I presented my idea for a next-generation enterprise management platform smarter and more flexible, applying the latest technologies like artificial intelligence, their eyes gleamed. They were fascinated by my vision and by the composure and confidence of a woman who had overcome adversity. After several meetings, we connected. Synergy Tech was born, a name that encompassed all my hopes and determination, the synergy of a new generation of technology. We rented a small office, not luxurious, but well-equipped and full of sunlight. The young people and I worked together day and night. The atmosphere at Synergy Tech was completely different from the last few years at Nexus Solutions. Here, there were no internal struggles or calculations, only a passion for technology and teamwork. I felt like I had returned to the beginning of my career, but this time I was much more the master of my destiny and stronger. In the midst of this progress, an unexpected visitor found me. It was Sierra. She called me to meet at a quiet cafe. She looked much more haggard than when she had appeared spectacularly at the celebration. Her swollen belly was larger, and her movements seemed heavy. She had lost her previous air of arrogance and defiance. In its place, only a mournful face remained, her eyes filled with tears. "Alexandra," she began with a trembling voice, "I know I have no right to talk to you. I know I did wrong, but please, I beg you. Couldn't you leave Sterling alone?" I stirred my coffee in silence, waiting to see what kind of theater she was going to stage. Sierra broke down crying. "Sterling is having a really hard time. Since you announced the withdrawal of investment, the company has been in crisis, and partners look at us with distrust. His mother pressures him every day. He has lost several pounds. I understand you're angry, but you were a couple for 10 years. Taking things to this extreme is pushing him into an abyss." She stroked her belly and added, "And there's my son. This child is not to blame for anything. I just want my son to be born into a complete family with his father. Please, I beg you, withdraw the lawsuit and don't make this any bigger. We will give you whatever compensation you ask for." "I'll tell Sterling, please, just let it go." Hearing that, an ironic smile escaped me. Who did she take me for? A woman whose silence can be bought with money? She and Sterling had humiliated me publicly and conspired to take everything from me. And now she came to lecture me about justice and an innocent child. I put down the coffee cup and looked directly into her eyes. "Are you finished?" My voice was so calm that even I was surprised. Sierra seemed disconcerted by my reaction. "First," I said, emphasizing every word, "the issue between Sterling and me is no longer an emotional matter of a love triangle. It is a matter of illegal business. He and his mother attempted fraud and embezzlement. That is a crime, and crimes must be punished. They have nothing to do with you or your son. Second, don't use your child as a shield. If you had truly thought about him, you wouldn't have interfered with another person's family in the first place, and you wouldn't have been complicit in their wrongdoing. The child is not to blame, but adults must take responsibility for their actions." And finally, I stood up from the chair. "Go tell Sterling that I don't need his money. What I need is justice, and I will not give up. If you truly want your son to have a father, advise him to face the truth and accept his responsibility before the law. It will be the best thing for the child." Without waiting for her response, I turned and left. I knew that behind me, her mournful face would have tightened with anger, but I didn't care. On the path I was now walking, there was no room for weakness or useless compassion. The real war had only just begun. A few weeks after the encounter with Sierra, just as attorney Jensen predicted, Sterling counterattacked, but he didn't resort to dialogue or negotiation, but to a much baser and pettier method. One morning, I received a court summons. Sterling, in his capacity as president of Nexus Solutions, had sued me, charging violation of trade secrets and intellectual property theft. The multi-page lawsuit claimed with a blunt tone that after leaving the company, I had used key technological secrets of Nexus Solutions to found Synergy Tech, thereby causing serious harm to the company. They demanded the immediate cessation of Synergy Tech's operations and astronomical damages. It was a clear reversal of the burden of proof, an attempt to stain my honor and crush my new company before it could take off. Upon hearing the news, the young engineers at Synergy Tech couldn't help but be worried. They feared for the future of the company and of being involved in a long and costly lawsuit. I understood their concern, but instead of showing hesitation, I called a meeting with all the staff. "Don't worry," I told everyone in a firm voice. "This is nothing more than a dirty tactic on their part. The technological foundation we are creating at Synergia Tech is completely new, based on much more advanced ideas and architecture than those of Nexus Solutions. Truth and justice are on our side. What we must do now is focus on our work and develop the best product possible. I will take care of all legal matters. My composure reassured them. Immediately afterward, I went with the lawsuit to Attorney Jensen's office. Contrary to my concern, she took a quick look at the papers and smiled. "He has dug his own grave," she said. "This is the opportunity we were waiting for. In a situation where we should have sued them, they themselves have created the legal scenario for us to present all our evidence. That Sterling, spoiled by his mother, is a complete fool." Under Attorney Jensen's direction, we quickly prepared the response to the lawsuit. We not only refuted Sterling's baseless accusations, but presented clear evidence demonstrating my authorship. The old notebook I had found became the most important piece of evidence. We photocopied and notarized every one of its pages, every architecture diagram, and presented it to the court. The chronology was evident compared to the date of Nexus Solutions' founding. We also had the emails from more than 5 years ago, from the time Sterling and I were exchanging the first ideas. In them, it was clear that I was proposing and conceiving the main guidelines. Furthermore, Attorney Jensen contacted 2 engineers who had left Nexus Solutions. They had worked there from the beginning, had seen me spend sleepless nights correcting errors with them, and had heard me explain the product vision. At first, they hesitated a little, but my sincerity and the lawyer's legal guarantees convinced them to testify. The first reconciliation hearing was held in an atmosphere of great tension. Sterling and his lawyer, with a very arrogant attitude, presented documents that supposedly demonstrated the uniqueness of Nexus Solutions technology. But when Attorney Jensen began to deploy our evidence one by one, Sterling's face began to change. He was stunned to see the copies of my notebook and turned pale when the lawyer cited the old emails. When the 2 former colleagues appeared, Sterling's confidence completely collapsed. He was unable to adequately answer the judge's questions and stammered. Sterling's lawsuit, far from sinking me, became a fatal blow to his reputation and the credibility of Nexus Solutions. In the technology sector, rumors began to circulate about his petty lawsuit and his cruel treatment of a co-founder. In the unlisted stock market, Nexus Solutions shares began to fall. In this silent war, I had won the first round overwhelmingly. The defeat in the defamation litigation further enraged Sterling and his mother. They realized they couldn't beat me through legal channels, so they began to resort to darker, dirtier methods. Their target now was the key links in our evidence collection, especially the witnesses who were well aware of Nexus Solutions' irregularities. Daniel, with his diligence and contacts, located a key figure, Mr. Davis, Nexus Solutions' former head of accounting. Mr. Davis had worked at the company for 3 years and had left suddenly about 6 months ago, right after the suspicious transactions with Apex Management LLC began. Daniel was convinced that he had left to avoid involvement in shady affairs and possessed important evidence. Convincing Mr. Davis was not easy. He was a middle-aged man of gentle character who only wanted to live a quiet life with his wife and 2 young children. When Daniel went to his house, he initially refused outright, saying he didn't know anything. He feared reprisals and worried that his family would suffer harm. "Mr. Daniel, please understand my situation," Mr. Davis said in an anxious voice. "Mrs. Vance is not someone you can mess with. I have a wife and children. I don't want to be involved in this." Knowing we couldn't force him, I asked Daniel to approach him slowly, building a relationship of trust, sometimes as a friend interested in his well-being. Gradually, thanks to Daniel's sincerity and perhaps his own conscience, Mr. Davis began to leak information. He confirmed that all contracts with Apex Management LLC had been rigged by order of Mrs. Vance to divert money. He also knew many other cases of tax evasion and expense inflation at the company. But just when we thought we had convinced Mr. Davis to cooperate, Mrs. Vance acted. She didn't threaten him directly, but used a more subtle method. Mr. Davis's wife, who worked as a teacher at a private school, suddenly began to be harassed by the administration for absurd reasons. His eldest son, a high school student, was surrounded and provoked one day by some bullies on his way home. Fortunately, bystanders intervened in time, and it didn't escalate. These incidents did not have serious consequences, but they were a clear warning. Mr. Davis panicked, calling Daniel with a trembling voice. "Mr. Daniel, please leave my family alone. I can't help Miss Hayes anymore. If they want to, I don't know what could happen to my family." When Daniel told me what happened, my heart sank. The rage I felt toward those despicable people was 10 times less than the remorse I felt for Mr. Davis's family. I couldn't endanger an innocent family for my fight. "Leave it, Daniel," I told him. "Let's not pressure him anymore. His family's safety comes first. We'll look for another way." Although it was a disappointment, we had no choice but to temporarily abandon that route. Losing a key witness, our investigation seemed to have reached a dead end, and difficulties piled up. I realized that this fight was much tougher than I had thought. My enemies not only had money and power, but they did not hesitate to use the cruelest means to achieve their ends. Seeing me somewhat discouraged by Mr. Davis's situation, my mother called me one night to her study. She prepared chrysanthemum tea, and its soft aroma relaxed me. "What are you thinking about?" she asked tenderly, placing a cup in front of me. "I'm exhausted, Mom. They are too cruel. I don't want innocent people to suffer because of me." My mother sighed and looked out the window at the garden shrouded in darkness. "Daughter, in business, as in life, there is no war without losses, but we have to know our limits. The decision not to pressure Mr. Davis anymore is the right one, but that doesn't mean we give up. To defeat your enemy, you first have to know exactly who they are." My mother looked at me with her deep eyes. "Today, I'm going to tell you a story, the story of your ex-mother-in-law's past, Sterling's mother." I was surprised. My mother had almost never talked about my in-laws. She only said they were a normal family, nothing special. "In reality," my mother began, "I've known Mrs. Vance for a long time, since we were both young and starting out in the business world. Even then, she was beautiful and intelligent, but her intelligence came with ambition and unscrupulous cruelty. My mother told me that in the past, Mrs. Vance had partnered with a very close friend. Together, they set up a small boutique design house, but when the business began to prosper, she hatched a plan to seduce her partner's husband and, at the same time, fabricated false evidence to accuse her of embezzlement. In the end, she seized the entire business, and her friend lost everything and ended up on the street. Sterling's father," my mother continued, "was a simple, diligent technician, Mrs. Vance married him only because he had some talent that could be useful for managing the workshop. He lived his whole life in his wife's shadow, unable to raise his voice, and died as quietly as he lived. Sterling grew up in that environment. Overprotected by his mother, he was only taught ideas about money and power. That boy is a copy of his mother. He has some talent, but his nature is weak, greedy, and easily manipulated." Listening to my mother's story, I began to understand everything. I understood why my mother-in-law could act in such a cruel and calculated way. Greed and betrayal ran through her veins. And the man I once loved, Sterling, was nothing more than a product molded by his mother. "And Sierra?" I asked. My mother took a sip of tea. "That girl, in my opinion, is nothing more than a pawn in Mrs. Vance's hands. She knew Sterling liked women and deliberately approached her. Young, obedient, and also capable of giving him a grandson to continue the lineage. What more perfect tool could there be? She used her to tie down Sterling and used the pregnancy as a weapon to humiliate you. And when she achieves her goal, who knows what that girl's fate will be?" My mother's analysis made me react. I had focused too much on Sterling and Sierra, forgetting that the true mastermind behind everything was my mother-in-law. She was the brain of the entire conspiracy. Realizing this, I knew I had to change my strategy. My target was not just Sterling, but that cunning woman. This fight, in reality, was a confrontation between her and me. A few days after deciding to leave Mr. Davis alone, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, a messenger delivered a small package to my mother's house. There was no sender, only an address. Inside the box was not a gift, but a blank black USB drive. My mother and I looked at each other suspiciously. I carefully connected the USB drive to my laptop. Several audio files named by date appeared on the screen. I hesitated for a moment and then clicked on the most recent file. A familiar voice played. It was Sterling's mother's voice. "You do as I say. Sign the contract, transfer the money, and I'll take care of everything. That Alexandra doesn't know anything, and Sterling doesn't dare disobey me." Next, a man's voice, who seemed to be a lawyer, was heard. "Ma'am, isn't this too risky? If we are discovered, we could face charges of fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. Every risk has its reward." Mrs. Vance's voice sounded confident. "As soon as we get rid of Alexandra, all of Nexus Solutions will be ours. Do you think this money will be a problem then? Don't worry, we won't be ungrateful to you." My mother and I listened, holding our breath. The 5 audio files contained conversations between Mrs. Vance and her lawyer, with the representative of Apex Management LLC, and with Sterling. The content revealed their entire conspiracy, from the creation of the shell company and the diversion of funds through false contracts to the plan to seize the company and burden me with the debts. This was the most conclusive, most valuable evidence, worth more than the testimony of dozens of people. "It's Mr. Davis," I said softly. "It has to be him. He can't show his face." But his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent. My mother nodded with gratitude in her eyes. "He's a good man. We are indebted to him." We immediately copied the files in several places and sent a copy to Attorney Jensen. She said that with this evidence, our victory was almost assured, but the joy was short-lived. That same night, while my mother and I were working late at the Synergia Tech office, her house alarm suddenly went off, connecting directly to her mobile phone. My mother quickly activated the security cameras. In the blurry images of the night, 2 black shadows could be seen entering the house through a back patio window. They were ransacking my mother's study, where we had opened the USB drive that afternoon. We called the police immediately. When we arrived at the house with the police, the 2 intruders had already disappeared. The study was messy, with documents scattered everywhere, but fortunately, they hadn't taken anything of value. It's clear that their target wasn't money. "They came for the USB drive," my mother said softly. "Mrs. Vance has realized about Mr. Davis. She is desperate to eliminate all the evidence. Thank goodness you were prudent. You made copies and brought the original with you." The failed robbery attempt clearly demonstrated the panic and desperation of the mother-son duo. They were like cornered beasts, willing to commit any folly. I knew the time for silence was over, and that now they would resort to more dangerous means. I clenched my fists, promising myself to be more cautious and stronger. The fight had entered its most critical phase. The attempted robbery failed, but it sounded the alarm. The mother-son duo would stop at nothing to destroy the evidence. This fact made me worry even more about Daniel. He had handled the direct investigation, managed a lot of information, and was in the most vulnerable position. I called Daniel and asked him to be very careful. "Don't worry, ma'am," Daniel said with a determined expression. "I know what I'm doing. I'm not afraid of them. What worries me most now is that although the recordings are valuable, their probative force to accuse them of tax evasion is insufficient. We need specific documents and accounting books." Daniel informed me that he was still in contact with some friends who still worked in the accounting department at Nexus Solutions. Ingeniously, he managed remote access to the company's internal server during the nights when system surveillance was lower. For several nights, Daniel barely slept, quietly copying and analyzing gigabytes of data, and his perseverance paid off. He discovered a second accounting system, cleverly hidden in a hidden partition of the server. This system recorded all of Nexus Solutions' real income and expenses, completely different from the sweetened figures they presented to the IRS. It revealed systematic tax evasion of tens of millions of dollars over the last 2 years. It was the definitive proof, the coup de grace, that could bring the mother and son duo to justice. But just as Daniel found the most crucial evidence, the enemy also smelled it. One night, as Daniel was returning home from work, 2 motorcycles without license plates blocked his path, forcing him to stop. 4 menacing-looking men got off and, without a word, pulled him out of the car and gave him a brutal beating. They didn't steal anything, they just destroyed his laptop and left him a threat. This is just a warning. If you keep sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, your family won't be safe. Daniel was taken to the hospital by a passerby with several cracked ribs and a body full of bruises. When my mother and I rushed to see him and witnessed his sorry state, I felt as if my heart was being stabbed. Daniel's wife cried inconsolably by his side. "Miss Hayes, please, we can't do this anymore. Those people are very bad. We are just employees. How are we going to beat them? I just want my husband to be well." I took his hand, but I had a lump in my throat and couldn't say anything. I felt terribly guilty. Daniel's loyalty had cost him and his family too high a price. "I'm sorry," was all I could utter. Daniel, despite the intense pain, tried to sit up. "Don't say that, ma'am. I did it of my own free will. I don't regret it." He turned to his wife and said in a hoarse voice, "Honey, I'm sorry I worried you and the kids, but I can't stand by and watch evil succeed out of fear. I do it not only for Miss Hayes, but for justice." Then he looked at me with his eyes still burning. "Ma'am, they didn't get anything. I saved the most important data elsewhere. Don't give up. We are about to win." The next day, I arranged for Daniel to temporarily take refuge with his wife and children in his in-laws' town. Seeing his small family scattered further fueled my anger against the mother-son duo. Daniel's sacrifice could not be in vain. I promised myself that I would make those wicked people pay a high price for what they had done. Daniel's loyalty was priceless, and I would never betray that trust. About a month after Daniel's incident, once he recovered and the most important evidence was in Attorney Jensen's hands, I decided that the time had come to launch a public attack. I needed to create enough pressure from public opinion and the business world so that the mother-son duo could not do anything else. The opportunity came when I was invited to participate in a major economic forum that brought together hundreds of top-tier entrepreneurs and investors in the country. I was sure Sterling would also attend. After the initial uproar, Nexus Solutions had been trying to clean up its image, sponsoring several events and boosting its advertising. At this forum, Sterling was invited as one of the main speakers to talk about innovation in the digital age. It was the perfect opportunity to tear off his mask of hypocrisy. I appeared at the forum with a completely new image. I was no longer the woman wounded by betrayal, but the confident businesswoman of Synergia Tech. I wore an elegant white suit and a modern short haircut. My presence immediately attracted everyone's attention. They whispered curiously about the awkward relationship between Sterling and me. Sterling was surprised to see me for a moment, but quickly regained a false confidence. He even approached me, extending his hand as if for a social greeting. "Long time no see, Alexandra. I didn't know you were interested in these forums." "The business world is a small place, President Vance," I replied with an equally social smile, but without accepting his hand. "I wish you a successful presentation." Sterling's presentation went smoothly. He spoke eloquently about Nexus Solutions' achievements and ambitious future plans, trying to paint an idyllic picture of the company. He received considerable applause. But the real show had not yet begun. During the question and answer session, after several routine questions from journalists, I calmly raised my hand to ask for the floor. All eyes in the room instantly turned toward me. The moderator hesitated for a moment, but then gave me the floor. I walked to the center of the aisle, took the microphone, and stared intently at the stage where Sterling stood with a forced smile. "Good morning, President Vance," I began with a clear and crisp voice. "I am Alexandra Hayes, CEO of Synergia Tech. First of all, congratulations on your impressive presentation. My question is about transparency in business management, a topic I am sure interests all investors present here." I paused so that everyone's attention reached its peak. According to the financial reports recently published by Nexus Solutions, the company's profit growth rate is very positive. However, consulting and marketing expenses have skyrocketed, representing an unusually high proportion of total revenue. In my experience, this is somewhat anomalous. Could you explain more clearly to the investors and partners here the cost structure and the actual efficiency of these investments? My question was not a direct accusation, but it struck exactly at Nexus Solutions' Achilles heel. It sowed great doubt about the veracity of the figures they were publishing. The room understood the hidden meaning of my question. On stage, Sterling turned pale. He was not prepared for this situation. He tried to stammer some generic answers about long-term investment strategies and brand building, but he couldn't offer a convincing explanation. His nervousness was the most eloquent answer. I didn't need to say anything more. I thanked him and calmly returned to my seat, but the impact of my question was enormous. Murmurs erupted throughout the room. Investors looked at each other suspiciously. Journalists began writing frantically. With a single question, I had completely demolished the image Sterling and his mother had painstakingly built. Nexus Solutions' credibility suffered an irreparable fissure in the eyes of the entire business world. The revelation at the Economic Forum was a severe blow to Nexus Solutions. Investors began to question. The press did not stop publishing speculative articles, and the company's value plummeted. Amidst this chaos, Sterling's mother, Mrs. Vance, knew she couldn't stand idly by. She understood that confronting me directly was disadvantageous, now that all the evidence and public opinion were on my side. She decided to play her last card, a malicious psychological attack aimed at the person she considered my weak point, my mother, CEO Isabella Hayes, Mrs. Vance personally called my mother and, with a surprisingly amiable voice, proposed a private meeting in an exclusive cafe to talk like adults. My mother, after consulting with me and attorney Jensen, accepted the proposal. She knew it was a trap, but it was also an opportunity for that shrewd old fox to betray herself. The exclusive cafe was down a quiet alley, a serene space filled with the murmur of water and the soft aroma of incense. My mother arrived dressed in an elegant dark purple velvet suit jacket that exuded depth and serenity. Mrs. Vance was already waiting for her, meticulously made up, but unable to hide her fatigue and rage. "Isabella, you came," Mrs. Vance said with a forced smile. "It's been a long time since we sat down alone like this." My mother also smiled gently and sat across from her. "Hello, Eleanor. I hope it's important that you called me yourself." Mrs. Vance began to speak evasively while serving the tea. "It's about the children. Young people in their impetuosity sometimes do things they shouldn't. It seems to me that Alexandra is going a little too far lately. As much as they were husband and wife, you can't push a person into a dead end like this." The blow Nexus Solutions suffered because of the forum was very significant. My mother listened in silence, imperturbable, raising her teacup. Getting no reaction, Mrs. Vance began to grow impatient. She put down the cup with a dry thud, and her voice sharpened. "Isabella, let's be honest. Control your daughter. We will compensate her amply for any money she wants. If we keep escalating this, it won't be good for anyone. When the net breaks, the fish dies. Do you understand what I mean?" "No, I don't understand," my mother replied, still in a calm voice. "My daughter is just trying to recover what is fair." "What is wrong with that?" Mrs. Vance laughed with a gaze sharp as a knife. "Justice? Where is absolute justice in this world? You and I are businesswomen. You won't tell me you don't know that. Everyone has something to hide, things they prefer others not to know. Are you sure your Phoenix Capital Group is 100% clean?" She began to show her true colors. "I still remember the real estate project in the Florida Keys 10 years ago. You were very fast then, too. Thanks to a few pieces of privileged information, you acquired some golden land. If all that came out in the press now, what would your investors think?" It was a blatant threat. She was using past business dealings, the complex networks of contacts, to pressure my mother and make her back down. She thought my mother, like her, would sacrifice her daughter for her own interests. But Mrs. Vance miscalculated. Upon hearing the threat, my mother did not flinch. She simply slowly took her cell phone out of her purse, pressed the stop recording button, and placed it on the table. The screen was still lit, clearly showing that the recording had been in progress. "Thank you, Eleanor," my mother said in a serene but forceful voice. "Our entire conversation, especially that threat you just made, has been recorded. I believe this audio file, along with the other evidence, will help the authorities understand the case more comprehensively." Mrs. Vance's face went from red to white. She stammered, "You dare?" "What wouldn't I dare?" My mother interrupted her. "The businesses you mentioned were managed entirely legally. I have nothing to hide. If you want to investigate, go ahead, but your actions today threatening and intimidating another person have been clearly recorded. I believe the one who should be worried now is you." With that, my mother stood up and straightened her suit. "The tea was delicious. Thank you for the invitation. I must leave." My mother left elegantly, leaving a petrified and distraught Mrs. Vance in the cafe. She trembled from head to toe with an expression of complete disbelief. Her last psychological attack had not only failed, but had become living evidence that incriminated her. The old fox had fallen into her own trap. Mrs. Vance returned home in a state of extreme panic. The encounter with my mother had completely demolished her last bit of confidence and composure. She smashed a tea set against the floor, screaming hysterically throughout the house. Sterling, frightened by his mother's state, rushed to ask her, "Mom, what's wrong? It's over. Everything is over," Mrs. Vance cried out, her hair messy. "That woman recorded everything. She set a trap for me. We are finished, son." She told Sterling the whole story. Listening to her, Sterling also froze, his face devoid of blood. He was aware of their situation. Mr. Davis's audio files, the double accounting Daniel found, and now his mother's recording threatening CEO Hayes. All this evidence together was enough to send both of them to prison. "What do we do, Mom?" "What if I go see Alexandra and beg her forgiveness?" Sterling said in a trembling voice. His innate weakness was surfacing again. "Beg for forgiveness?" his mother snapped. "Do you think that will do any good now? Do you think Alexandra and her mother will let us go that easily? Fool, we only have one way out." "What?" "Run," Mrs. Vance said, grinding her teeth. "We have to leave here before the police come, sell all the shares, take out all the money, and leave the country. With money, you can live anywhere." In their desperation, a plan to divert assets was hastily drawn up. Mrs. Vance contacted several intermediaries through her old business contacts and agreed to quickly sell all her Nexus Solutions shares at a price much lower than the market price. The transaction had to be fast and in cash. At the same time, Sterling was entrusted with withdrawing money from the company and personal bank accounts and gradually transferring it to offshore accounts through unofficial channels. They moved in secret, terrified. Sterling spent the day locked in his room, his face haggard, talking on the phone in whispers. Sierra, her belly very swollen by now, noticed the change in Sterling and asked him what was happening, but she only received irritation and evasiveness. Her feminine intuition told her something bad was happening. She secretly looked at Sterling's phone and was horrified to see a reservation confirmation message for one-way flight tickets to Europe. The tickets were only for 2 people, Sterling and his mother. Sierra collapsed. She understood that she and the child she carried were nothing more than pawns who were about to be abandoned. Meanwhile, on our side, all the movements of the mother-son duo were under control. Daniel, from his refuge, continued to closely monitor Nexus Solutions transactions through trusted friends. Upon detecting the anomalous sale of a large quantity of company shares and the withdrawal of large sums of money from the accounts, Daniel immediately informed me. "Ma'am, I think they are trying to flee." Daniel's voice on the other end of the phone was urgent. Hearing the news, I didn't hesitate for a second. I immediately called Attorney Jensen. "Attorney, I think the time has come." "Understood," the lawyer replied firmly. "Alexandra, stay calm. I will go immediately to the authorities with all the documents and evidence we have. The net of justice is wide, and although it seems slow, it never fails. They won't be able to go anywhere." Night fell over the city. In the luxurious mansion, the mother-son duo hurriedly packed bundles of cash and documents into suitcases to catch an early morning flight. They had no idea that outside their house, an invisible net of the law had been cast, closing in, waiting for the opportune moment. That night, the city was soaked by persistent rain. The rhythmic tapping of drops on the window sounded like a sad melody announcing the end. Sterling's mansion, despite it being midnight, was fully illuminated. The air inside was tense as a bowstring. Mrs. Vance kept moving, restless, urging Sterling. "Hurry up, son. The car to the airport will be here soon. Is everything ready?" "Yes, Mother," Sterling replied in a tired voice. He had just finished a call with an intermediary who confirmed that the last stock sale transaction had been completed and the cash would be delivered at a secret location. Everything seemed to be going according to their desperate plan. They didn't know that Attorney Jensen had spent the entire afternoon at the district attorney's office. She had presented the entire case clearly and logically, from the evidence of my intellectual property to the false contracts, the double accounting, the call recordings, and the audio of Mrs. Vance threatening my mother. The massive, irrefutable set of evidence surprised the investigators. Given the seriousness of the case and the risk of the suspects fleeing, an arrest warrant and an asset freeze order were urgently approved. Just as Sterling and his mother, dragging suitcases full of cash and documents, were leaving the door to get into the waiting car, 2 police cars silently pulled up, blocking the exit. Doors opened, and several uniformed officers got out. At the front, an inspector with a serious face. "We are from the FBI Economic Crimes Unit," the inspector said, showing the arrest warrant to the mother-son duo. "Sterling Vance and Eleanor Vance, you must accompany us to the precinct to clarify some matters related to the management of Nexus Solutions." Mrs. Vance froze. The suitcase she was holding fell to the ground, and bundles of cash spilled out, scattering onto the rain-soaked pavement. Her face turned white as paper, and her eyes widened in terror. Her perfect plan had crumbled at the gates of paradise. Sterling trembled from head to toe, and his legs gave way, forcing him to lean against the wall to keep from falling. "There must be some mistake," Mrs. Vance stammered. "We are honest business people. We haven't done anything wrong." The inspector said no more and signaled to his subordinates. The mother-son duo was led to the car, immersed in confusion and helplessness. At the same time, another team entered the house to execute a search and seizure order. The entire mansion, as well as the bank accounts, shares, and all assets in the names of Sterling and Mrs. Vance, were frozen. The net of the law had closed without leaving a single loophole. From the second-floor window, Sierra saw everything, hugging her belly and crying inconsolably. There was no place for her or her son in Sterling and his mother's escape plan. She had been discarded like a useless object. Now, seeing the man she once loved and the woman she feared being taken away by the police, Sierra only felt infinite emptiness and despair. When Attorney Jensen gave me the news, I was sitting in the living room with my mother. I felt neither joy nor triumph. In my heart, only a strange calm reigned. A stormy chapter of my life had finally ended. All the resentment and hatred seemed to have been washed away by the rain of that night. The following months were a time of legal proceedings. The Nexus Solutions case, due to its magnitude and complexity, caused a great stir in the business world. With the irrefutable evidence we provided, the prosecution quickly unraveled the entire conspiracy. The trial was public and attracted special media attention. I did not attend. I didn't want to see the faces that had caused me so much harm again. I learned everything through Attorney Jensen's calls and the news. In court, faced with the evident proofs, Sterling completely collapsed. He confessed to all his crimes, helping his mother divert funds, creating false debts, and planning the theft of my assets after the divorce. Crying, he blamed everything on his mother's instigation and pressure, pleading for clemency. The image of the confident and arrogant president had disappeared. Only a weak and miserable prisoner remained. In contrast, Mrs. Vance stood firm until the end. She denied the charges, claiming she was the victim of a conspiracy, that the recordings were manipulated, and the accounting books falsified. She continued to play the role of the innocent victim until the prosecution presented the recording of her call threatening my mother. Hearing her own voice, arrogant and menacing, resonating in the solemn courtroom, she finally broke down and silently bowed her head. The final verdict was for the crimes of fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. Mrs. Endazuri Vance, as the principal perpetrator, was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Sterling, considering his confession and repentance, was sentenced as an accomplice to 15 years. The other parties involved also received their corresponding punishments. Nexus Solutions, my spiritual child that I once nurtured with all my heart, now stained by debt and corruption, was finally declared bankrupt. Justice had been served, but in my heart there was no joy of victory. only a melancholic sadness for a beautiful first love that ended in tragedy and for the years of youth lost in deception. A week after the trial ended, I decided to do something I had been thinking about for a while. I drove to the quiet rural town where Daniel's family was temporarily staying. I wanted to express my sincere gratitude to my loyal assistant, who had sacrificed so much for me. Daniel's small house was surrounded by green fields. The air was pure and peaceful, in contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of the city. Daniel, his wife, and children came out to meet me at the entrance to the town with a warm welcome. Their smiles were simple and affectionate. Daniel's injuries had completely healed, and he looked much healthier and happier. I brought some gifts and a financial gratuity, but the couple flatly refused to accept them. "Ma'am, please don't do this," Daniel said. "What I did was because I believed in justice and in you. Your victory is the greatest gift for me. Now, please let me return to work at Synergia Tech. I miss the work very much." We shared a simple but comforting meal. Listening to the laughter of the couple and the children's chatter, I felt a deep peace. I realized that after all the storms, what is important is not money or success, but human affection, loyalty, and kindness. This trip cleansed the last vestiges of bitterness from my heart and prepared me to face a new chapter in my life. A year has passed, a year since that stormy night, when Sterling and his mother disappeared amid police sirens, and I, sitting by the window in my mother's house, sighed as if a weight had been lifted. Time has healed many things, but it hasn't erased the scars, and from those scars, I have learned to be reborn. My life did not stop at the pain or end with the betrayal. I chose another path. With my own hands and mind, I built my own business. Synergia Tech, the small company we started in a modest office with Daniel and a few young engineers, is now a shining name in the technology sector. At first, we spent nights programming fueled by instant noodles. When we got our first contract, we hugged and shouted with joy. We made countless presentations to investors to secure funding, and were sometimes discouraged by cold rejections, but we did not give up. The culmination came at the Entrepreneur of the Year Gala. Under the bright lights on a grand stage, I stood firm in my white suit and received a crystal trophy from a government official. A thunderous ovation erupted, but this time it was different. I was no longer Sterling's shadow, nor was I standing next to a man to be called the president's wife. I was Alexandra Hayes, an entrepreneur in my own right, a woman who had risen above everything. The press rushed to publish articles calling me the icon of the American technology sector's renaissance. But what moved me most were not those headlines. It was Daniel's gaze from the audience, gleaming with pride, and the warm smile of an old friend who had accompanied me in silence from a little further away. Another turning point came when the court ordered the liquidation of Nexus Solutions' assets to pay its debts. At the public auction, I sat in the front row. My former competitor was now just a name in ruins. When the original patent for the management system that I had conceived came up for auction, I raised my paddle without hesitation. The room filled with murmurs. Finally, for a reasonable price, I bought it all back. The moment the title of ownership was in my hands, I closed my eyes in silence. The circle had closed. Nexus Solutions, where I was betrayed and humiliated, was officially part of the past, and the product of my mind had returned to the hands of its creator. I felt neither triumph nor arrogance, only a deep peace. An old door had closed, and a new one opened wide. One summer afternoon, while visiting a friend in a hospital's maternity ward, I coincidentally ran into Sierra. She was sitting in a hallway, cradling a plump baby. She no longer wore designer clothes. She wore a loose shirt and looked simple. Her face was tired, but the look she gave her son was infinitely tender. Sierra looked up and froze when she saw me. There was no longer arrogance or defiance in her gaze, only a wounded and lonely young mother. "Alexandra," Sierra said in a trembling whisper. I looked at the child in her arms. He slept peacefully, moving his lips as if dreaming. In that instant, all the hatred within me vanished. I understood that this child was not to blame for anything. He did not choose his parents, nor did he know anything about the dirty conspiracies of the past. "Are you well?" I asked. Sierra lowered her head, and tears began to fall. "I'm sorry, Alexandra. It's too late for everything. I just want to raise this child well. Can you ever forgive me?" I sighed. Forgiveness was not for her, but for me. Continuing to cling to hatred would only hurt myself. The past is the past, Sierra. Take good care of your son. He needs a mother who knows how to live correctly. Sierra hugged her son and burst into tears. I nodded slightly in farewell and continued on my way. I felt light as a feather. Another afternoon, Andrew and I were strolling along the New England coast. The reddish sun was slowly setting on the horizon, and the waves gently reached the shore. I took off my shoes and felt the cool water on my bare feet. Andrew walked beside me in silence, but his mere presence brought me peace. "Alexandra," Andrew said softly, "you have lived too long for others. Now live for yourself. And if one day you want someone to accompany you, I would like it to be me." I turned toward Andrew. His eyes were kind and firm. Instead of answering, I smiled. I wasn't ready to start a new romance yet, but I knew I had a friend, a life companion, a calm shoulder to lean on. We walked together along the long sandy beach, leaving 2 pairs of footprints behind us. Before me stretched the vast sea and a sky tinged red by the dawn, announcing a new day in my life. I took a deep breath. An intense faith sprouted in my chest. Because even if a woman loses everything, if she retains her dignity, her wisdom, and her courage, she can always be reborn and find happiness.